Welcome to call four. This is this last part, the PB3, performance breathing three, really cool for a couple of things in the habits that we'll talk about here a little bit. A lot of the key things that you can literally use like every day, whether you're coaching or you're an athlete, or just in your own exercise and stuff like that. And we talk about a couple of interesting things that we've alluded to, or maybe talked about a little bit with the breathing control as well. That I think is really cool and interesting, and the big reason why good breathing benefits so many people, right? Same layout. I'm just gonna ask if anybody has any questions on assessments. We won't go through that again. We included that little module in all three of them, knowing that like when we first built this too, it wasn't necessarily in this format where you had a two weeks to do PB1, 2, and 3 and things like that. So we knew that at times could be a lot of time in between, say, PB1 and PB2 and things like that. So we wanted the assessments in each one of the modules just so you could have it right there and do if you wanted to review something of it. But I just wanted to see if anybody had any questions on whether the objective breathing assessments or the neuro assessments. So let me ask you guys a question. Have you tried the neuro assessment, like doing a toe touch or a torso rotation, shoulder internal rotation, any of the things we show? Have you shown that or have you played with that with anything else you do? As far as workouts and mobility routines or anything like that?
I have a little bit, Pat. Just more so with workouts and kind of like yoga workouts, or even I've done it after coaching sessions. So I sell high ticket sales from time to time, and it's super intense. It's about a week. It can be really high stress, and I'm in the midst of one of those events. So I've been doing the neuro assessments after calls, um, which has been really interesting because some high stress or like just real intense calls have produced some um, responses in me neurologically. So I've used it elsewhere and it's been really insightful.
And that just, it just comes back to the fact that we don't have a separation between what we think of as physical threat and what we think of as psychological or emotional, mental threat. Your body's going to react the same. Things are going to tighten up, and I will use different assessments like in a clinic, right? Everything from you guys know the pulse ox that you put in your finger, kind of give your O2 saturation reading. Some of those, they're a little bit more expensive, come with what's called a perfusion index. If you ever heard of that, perfusion index is how much blood is perfusing down to your distal extremities. So with that perfusion index number, if it's really high, that means a lot of blood is down perfusing to your fingertip, which means you're in a more parasympathetic state. If that number is low, because when we get stressed, blood flows away from our distal extremities, and so that number gets low if we're under stress. So depending on the person, you can literally check it with things like that. Range of motion is just the easiest way. It's very obvious to people, like, oh my gosh, I did these 2 drills and now I'm touching my toes. I haven't touched my toes in 5 years. That's something I hear like every week, right? So it's the most obvious thing, but you can do it with strength as well. You could, if you have a good reaction to something neurologically, you will be able to produce more strength. I'll do that with muscle testing. Like yesterday, had a gal we had rotator cuff issues, tested some external rotation actually with a rotator cuff. We did some isometrics. She jammed. She's a golfer. She basically clubbed the ground. Mike, I'm sure that never happens. for you, but and she literally and just jammed up her shoulder and it had been hurting. So she was really weak and had a little bit of pain. We did some isometrics around that shoulder, and then I did the retest of the muscle test where I'm, trying to push down and she's trying to push back into external rotation and improved it. So there's that assess, reassess, and many ways to do it. Range of motion is just the easiest, and I'll do the same thing during exercise. Say I'll do a set of deadlifts, and I'm just using, say, a toe touch range of motion test, right? See what I am before I'm doing my work sets. After my first work set, I test my range of motion. If it has decreased, then I'm doing like some mobility drills around the pelvis and the spine and things like that until my reassessment is back at least to baseline. That's my indicator of doing another set, vice just looking at time. Is my nervous system turned back on? So that's an interesting way you can use it during exercise as well.
Pat, quick question, and I was sort of like Julie, except I haven't tried to introduce anything in coaching, more experimental from myself, just playing around with the assessments. And how do you know when there are other variables playing into this equation, like whether or not it's something that the body is in fight or flight versus the parasympathetic? How do we know that there's not like there's the guy gets out of bed and he's just stiff that morning, or he hasn't warmed up, or whatever it might be? How do you play those all together to say, well, this is something that if we could reduce the stress and go into a more parasympathetic mode, we can handle it neurologically through the breathing. But are there other things like yesterday? It's sort of funny you brought up the golf, but played golf with a guy, and he was talking about like his warm up is so funny. His warm up swing looks good, and then he he swings and it's all tight and it looks like crap. And I asked them, I said, do you breathe when you swing, or breathe prior to you swing, or do you hold your breath after your practice swing? And he said, I never thought about that. And I wouldn't have thought about that either, if it hadn't
Yeah.
been for this class. And so I said something to him, and it seemed to make a difference. It was like, that's really, maybe it was psychological too. I don't know. But uh, I guess my first question is, how do you assess against other variables? And then how do you know if it's working, right? Like
I,
that had something to do with that.
well, so that's a great question. Assessing against other variables, there's always other stuff, right? There that the brain is just receiving gigabytes of information all the time, and your other things you're thinking about can affect what you're doing, right? It's pretty common, and golf is crazy, right? Because it's all about the you getting out of your own head, really.
Mhm.
If they're coming in with a problem and it's like appeared 2 months ago, I start asking them what was happening about 3 months ago or a week before this happened. And I cannot tell you how many times it's like, oh, well, my dad died and I had to go back out to California and take care of his affairs and things like that. That's like literally things like that. Everything can affect you. You mentioned kind of waking up stiff and things like that, right? You can think about, and that happens to everybody. I don't care if you're an Olympic gymnast or a ballet dancer. When you wake up, you're stiffer than later on in the day, and that is because your proprioception, which is your brain's 3D map of you, is cloudy because you haven't been moving because you've been sleeping. And if you think of proprioception as your brain's 3D map of you, that map gets clear and it gets detailed through movement. So it's foggy, it's cloudy, right? That map is not clear. And so your brain can't predict very well because it's not, that proprioceptive map is not clear from all the joints and muscles and tendons. And so we feel stiffer because the brain is in a more threatened mode, in a sense that you don't have this cloudy map, just like driving into a fog bank. You don't hit the accelerator, you hit the brakes, right? When people come in, they'll do that all the time because I'll be like, okay, let's see your toe touch. What's that look like? They're like, well, I haven't done anything yet today. And I'm like, that's cool. I don't care, right? Because I just want to see what you are right now. And if we then do a drill, whether it's a breathing drill or a different drill, do you get better? Because that's what's great about this assess, reassess process. It's going to tell you nervous system is very binary. Yes, no, it likes it. That's why I have the thumbs there, right? I just realized I was doing this while I was looking at the screen. That yes, no thing, it's very binary. It's going to tell you right away whether something is threatening. That is what's so useful about that assess, reassess process. You can know right in the moment whether something you just did, how it affects you, right? If you have somewhat of a baseline. When your buddy was golfing, right? He's not worried about his score when he's warming up. His swing's fluid, right? Because the other aspect of the activity, in this case, a sport, which is the competitive aspect, whether you just want to score well or you want to beat somebody or whatever, is not involved in the warm up. It always amazed me when I was young playing tennis when a guy would serve and he'd serve and it was a really hard serve, but it was just out. Because it was just out, I would bam, and I'd have this awesome return. I'd be like out, but it was just this easy, awesome return because the stress of the moment, and that's in a split second, right? But even that, I remember that happened multiple times as a kid. So, and this is what's tough about golf is it's you decide when the swing starts, right? You are in total control of that. It's not a reactionary sport, which puts more pressure on you, right? So the way you could use that then is like, okay, I do some kind of range of motion assessment while I'm warming up, and then that's your baseline. As you're going through the game, you're checking yourself like, hey, where am I? And can you use the breathing to get a better reassessment before your next swing? Because if you can, then you've reduced threat to the nervous system. Your performance is going to be higher. And then using the breathing, specifically that kind of that two in, four out, right? That kind of thing is a calming and parasympathetic breathing process. Then you're going to reduce the threat to the system and you're going to be able to perform better, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. It's just one of those things that I got to continually remind myself of to make sure that I'm sort of living in that moment to where, you're cognitive, you're aware of the situation as opposed to like force feeding it.
If you think about any skill you have been really good at, right? When the stress gets higher, your ability to be calm, right? We would call this being in the zone or the flow state, things like that. Your ability to do that under those stressful situations and kind of have more of a parasympathetic can be very powerful. It's not that you want to be like totally, yogied out, right, during the heat of a
Yeah.
basketball game or in play of a football field.
This
But
is correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this where like the performance anxiety curve comes into play, right?
yeah, because you start to overthink things,
Yeah.
right? And that drives up the sympathetic too high. Especially like say a sport like wrestling, you want your sympathetic to be up a little bit. You certainly don't want to be completely chilled out. Mike and Clayton have talked about this with the wrestler he had that like never really ramped up until the second period. So he used to have him do sprints before the first period, like down and backs to get him going, right? Because for him it was different. He wasn't there in that first period. You need to have the right level of arousal, right? So it's really about what is and that's different for everybody, right? So your level of arousal could be too much if you're too hyped up or you're overthinking. And then your arousal could be too low too if you're not prepared. That's usually not what happens for, the vast majority of athletes. It's usually too much arousal, before the event, and they need to calm down. But it's really about being able to, and this is what's cool about breathing, is understanding that that's how you can control once you build these habits. Key point, right? And you talked about that, like you're not instinctively doing it. But once you build in these habits, one, you can consciously control it if you need to, but then two, you will more unconsciously breathe in a pattern that calms you down and corrects you for the moment. For you, when you're going up to address the ball and you're going through your swing, and do you need to calm everything down a bit, or do you need to ramp up a bit? It's probably going to be calmed down in that situation, right?
And we did the Essentials course, our short course, the 40-minute version. It really focuses on getting you to understand your arousal levels and how to manage those with the breath. One assessment, 2 drills, super foundational of exactly what we're talking about here. For me, in high school, I never stressed. So I was able to go out and wrestle loose, but, do my thing. In college, it was a much more of a threat. And so I was much more anxious. In high school, I had one match where I was sick. I didn't feel very good. I was wrestling a state champ, and I needed the arousal to go up, but I didn't have that tool at the time. Now I know I would have done burst breathing before my match to have gotten more energy. You're on the 18th hole and you're exhausted because it's 100 degrees outside. Maybe a little burst breathing gets you a little bit more of that energy. As well. So kind of interesting how they all play out, but we'll get you a copy of the Essentials course. And Julie, we added that to your profile today too. So you guys can check out, that shorter version. I think it's maybe our more marketable version to the general public.
Yeah. Just gives you some of the basic breathing drills, and then into how do you use that in a competitive cycle? Practice, pre-competition, competition, and recovery. So the breathing mechanics in performance breathing 3. Performance breathing 1, we're focused on the diaphragm for the breathing muscles, right? Performance breathing 2, we kind of want that serratus anterior along those ribs. And then in 3, we go up a little bit higher. So your pec minor is that muscle that you can see there in the picture, right? It's connected from it's a little hook coming off your scapula called the coracoid process. Comes down to ribs 3, 4, and 5. Every time you do a plank or a push-up, this muscle is activating, right? From a movement standpoint, it's protracting the shoulder, meaning it's moving the shoulder forward. So you're bracing, if you're pushing, right? It's bringing your scapula closer, right, as it pulls, right? Muscles pull. I won't go to a big discussion about muscles and their insertions being origin. We usually talk about muscles in origin and insertion. That's kind of a fallacy, really. They can pull in either direction. If the muscles, wherever it's connected, it can pull in either direction. So for breathing, we're keeping that scapula packed and not moving, which we've shown the demo videos how you can first initially find that by leaning against the wall, having your scapula against the wall, and then breathing into your hand, like the picture of me breathing there, so that you're actually pulling the ribs back towards the scapula, right? Getting those ribs moving. So performance between 1, 2, and 3, we kind of go, we go from the diaphragm, because everyone needs to have good control of the diaphragm. We come up a little bit, serratus anterior muscles on the ribs, and then up a little bit higher for the pec minor here. So you can, because we want to be breathing low and horizontal vice. We don't want to be breathing up here all the time, but we want to have the capability to expand the entire rib cage, right? We want to own everything. That's the point of being able to breathe up higher. The breathing mobility drills, right, for those sternocostal and vertebrocostal, being basically where the ribs come into the sternum, where the ribs come into your vertebrae. We want all those ribs, right, to be able to spread. They move. It's not a lot, not even as much as I'm moving my fingers here, right? But we do want them to spread. Almost think of it like a bucket handle, right? Was those ribs come up and out. And that's why we do the stair step breathing. And we do that last, because if you've tried it, it's not easy at first to get that, right? And to feel it. But think about the core, the reason it's designed like this. Okay, we got diaphragm low, straightest anterior, a little bit high, kind of middle ribs, high front ribs. How do we move those? Well, with the pec minor, right? And so once you've played with activating those 3 levels of muscles, then you can get into and be able to find and feel a little bit more this stair step breathing to open the ribs up. There's a lot of muscles in and around the ribs, but the 3 that we've worked on in these courses in 1, 2, and 3 lead you to have the access, right, to be able to spread these ribs and gain more mobility. Again, the joint mobility is because if those joints don't move well, then it's really tough to breathe well. That's, I mean, just the bottom line. So I'm doing the thoracic glides in the 2 different ways, right? And then the stair step breathing. We need, if you can't move those joints, that your rib cage can't move well, you can't breathe well, right? So these give you more access to moving those joints and the muscles that are important.
I'm glad you said that it can be challenging, because I definitely, those first reps, I was almost in pain. I realized how low mobility, even in just my low back, which I know, and it was challenging, especially the side lateral, like stair step routine. And then I almost lost my breath in the other one. So I'm just glad you affirmed that. Sometimes it's challenging. It has gotten easier through the weeks, but those initial ones were definitely low response.
Yeah, this one's it's tough, right? And that's why it's in the third after you've already got some movement in those ribs and gotten the sense of what we're trying to do and target. But they're great for what you just described, like realizing like, oh, wow, that's hard to do. Like, but once you own it, right, through practice and through consciously doing it, then, and I a lot of times I'll use this with, it's certainly applicable to wrestling, but especially Brazilian jiu-jitsu, right? Because you can end up very tangled up in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and you need to be able to breathe anywhere in that cylinder that is your rib cage, right? I might not be able to do diaphragm breath. I better be able to breathe into my back a little bit. Cycling's another big one. I'll often teach cyclists, because they're hunched over, how to breathe and expand their ribs from their spine. Because of the position they're in, it's difficult to have a really awesome diaphragm breath. But yeah, this is those are difficult, right? But they do get easier, and you just get much more sense of your ability to move the ribs when you're after you practice them.
I almost had to train myself to allow. So because those first motions were like resist, my body just wanted to resist. And as soon as I like settled in, said like just allow, stop resisting, that allowed just more breath to happen. So it was a bit of a mental shift that had to happen before the physical shift could happen.
What's physiologically taking place as you get better at this?
Most people don't realize they have breathing issues, right? Unless you got like really bad asthma or something like that. Nobody thinks about this. Nobody thinks about the mechanics of breathing, right? They think about their lungs, right? They're thinking about the chemical aspect mostly. But so people don't even realize they have this issue a lot of times with that they can't really move their ribs in order to get and have good breathing. So if you were in a cast, if your arm is in a cast for 6 weeks, you come out of that cast, you're not whipping that arm around, right? It's like, man, right? Because the muscles have not moved. There's a term I learned in Z Health called SMA, sensory motor amnesia, right? If you haven't moved something well or much or very far, your brain starts to forget how to move it, right? I'm dealing this with a client she's had a double shoulder replacement, and and one was worse than the other, and for many years could not use her left arm very much, very high up in here at all, right? And so that's one thing we're dealing with and training her out of is that sensory motor amnesia that, oh, I can get this thing over around now that the joint has been fixed, right? So from the physiologically, the muscular portion, right, is that you are training to use these muscles that maybe you have not been using, right, very much or very well. And then neurologically, your brain now goes, oh, now I know how to fire the diaphragm. Now I know how to fire the serratus anterior on the sides of the ribs. Now I know how to fire this pec minor, right? So now you have more access because from a neuromuscular standpoint, you've been practicing it. And so then unconsciously, which is what we all want, right? The good unconscious breathing, it happens much easier because you put the time and reps in focusing on the conscious breathing of it. So it is both sides of it. It is definitely muscular because of actually moving them from a long-term perspective, right? And regaining movement there. In a short-term perspective, muscularly, whenever you're contracting muscles, so we're contracting the pec minor, right, in this direction when we're doing this breathing drill from PB3, right? Ribs 3, 4, and 5 are pulling up and out, and that muscle's contracting back towards where it's connected on the scapula. If a muscle's contracting, it's getting blood flow, right? So you're also increasing. So from a very mechanical, muscular standpoint, you're improving the blood flow to those muscles too. And then, of course, you're firing. The only way muscles fire is your brain sends a signal. And so now you're improving the neuromuscular coordination. That address it? Good. Okay. Any other breathing mechanics issues or questions? If one pops up, we can just let me know, right? All right. So breathing control module for PB3. The big thing we want you to get out of this, right? Inhalation equals an increase in sympathetic. Exhalation, increase in parasympathetic. We talked about that a little bit last time, right? The other interesting aspect of this, the upper lobes of the lungs have more sympathetic nerve endings, and the lower lobes of the lungs have more parasympathetic nerve endings. So this kind of comes full circle on why we have to use that diaphragm, because the diaphragm, when it contracts, it goes down, right? Meaning you're getting a breath in which it is coming more towards the lower lobes of the lungs. It's also more blood rich down there, right? And so as we get that, even in inhale, right? Even though inhaling is more sympathetic, right? If we're diaphragmatically inhaling, we are getting down into those lower lobes, which drives a more parasympathetic response because that's where more parasympathetic nerve endings are. You have more sympathetic nerve endings up here. This is why, and just think about this, right? Danger happens. You're taking short breaths, you're taking very brief breaths up into the chest, right? Because you have to react to something, right? So this all makes physiological sense, right? Between the muscular action, the inhaling versus exhaling, where these nerve endings are for sympathetic versus parasympathetic, right? So it all kind of, makes sense on how we are physiologically built in this sense of being able to control your breathing for what you need, right? So Mike talked about the burst breathing that you guys will see in the performance training essentials, right? Is basically, so I'm just taking a quick sniff through the nose, quick blow out through the mouth. That is not a breath to calm me down. That's a breathing method, right? To hype me up and to get some quick oxygen, because oxygen is going to equal energy, right, for a fight or flight situation, right? Or these days, sporting situation. We don't have to fight or flight too much. We're not fighting the saber-tooth tigers too often these days, which is good.
For me, it's like on a motorcycle. If I'm out on a nice windy country road, I'm relaxed and I'm breathing out more than I breathe in, parasympathetic. When I'm getting ready to go onto I-25 and fight traffic, I do the burst breathing because I need to be alert. I need to know that those cars are zipping by and I need to, right? It's a whole different experience. And we get to control that now with these tools. It's what I can't thank Pat enough for what he's done for how I manage my health because of the way these tools work. It's pretty cool.
Mike, that brings me to a thought, and I've always kind of played with this in my head too, prior to the breathing, but it makes even much more sense now. Like in most duels in competition in wrestling, we have ample time to warm up, right? Like you have time generally at the beginning of the match, guys warm up before the duel starts, and then in between, they know when sort of the pace of the match, when they're going to actually wrestle, so they can perform their warm ups at an appropriate time. But when we go to these major tournaments like Fargo, for example, that's not the case. You may have an early warm up as a team, but then individuals by their weight classes are being pulled up at these random paces. And oftentimes guys are kind of caught by surprise. There's really not the area to warm up in a traditional sense. So where burst breathing and things like that would really kind of pay dividends is in those situations where you don't have ample opportunities to get ready to go out for competition.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting, right? Because I may perform with better with a higher sympathetic, or I may perform better with a parasympathetic. And that's where you have to figure that out as an athlete. My best match ever was against TJ Jaworski. I left the arena, I went to the wrestling room, got a quick warm up in, and the kid before me got pinned. And so they ran over to the wrestling room. They were like, "Hey, you're up now." And so I had a chance to do a portion of my warm up, but I didn't have a chance to do the stand around and look at the match and look over at TJ Jaworski and stress up, right? I didn't have that piece. It was the best match I ever wrestled. And it was because I did the majority of what I needed to do for me. And then I didn't have time to increase threat. I went right into competition with a lower threat percentage. I realized I don't need to be Dan Gable slapping people in the face. I needed to be a little bit more calm to get my ideal performance level. So you're exactly right. How, state tournament, Fargo, cramped space. I don't have a lot of mat space and I'm freaking out, right? Because this is so much more different. And that could be a lot of it. Like certainly there's the physiological warm-up piece, but then there's the emotional piece of I'm at the junior nationals, I'm at the states. It means more. It's more intense. Well, that's more threatening. And
A lot more sensory input going on in something like Fargo too, that your brain,
sure.
your unconscious brain is processing in the background discs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in Iowa, we'd had the state tournament at a place called the Barn, and that was back when you could smoke cigarettes in the hallway. And, right. And so I'm walking in there, I'm a high school kid with asthma, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm choking, I'm gagging, like there's no way I can feel optimal, but I didn't have the tools to try to increase more optimal performance either. And this is, Pat always says it. These are the tools I wish I'd had as a competitive athlete, as a special forces commander. Like man, if we'd had this when we needed it, well, we didn't, but now we've got it to be able to help others move forward. It's always learning.
That's what's cool about this, right? Because now as an athlete, you're empowered, right? There's something you can do, whether you need to ramp up or ramp down arousal, right? Whether in between periods, how do you calm your breathing down, or in between plays, how do you calm your breathing, right? This is a tool that now you have that you're powered with. This is what I love about the breathing stuff. I love all the neurological stuff. That's why we're making multiple courses. But this one's powerful, and it's super useful. The breathing control drill is basically one I made up. I called it the ideal breath. And I think I talk about in the course, but different, in the breathing world and different circles and different studies you see, you kind of often see this, the ideal breath is right around, it's funny. You often see something like 5.6 breaths a minute. Well, I don't think anybody's going to take a 0.6 of a breath, right? So I just made, well, let's do a 6-second breath. What would a 6-second breath be that you can use and control, right? And so that ideal breath, 10 seconds long, 2 in, the 1 second natural pause, 6 out, 1 second natural pause, 2 in again. I use this a lot when I'm doing things that are very static from an exercise standpoint. If I'm doing a dead hang, right, for grip strength and just hanging, like, see, can I get to 2.5 minutes of just hanging, and I'll use this breathing method, right, while I'm doing that. Or I still do a lot of wrestler's bridge, right? I try to hold for 2 minutes, just get up in the bridge and hold it 2 minutes. And now my spine and my rib cage is extremely a lot of extension, right? So you can't breathe the same way you normally do when you're just in a normal posture. And so I'll use this as I'm going through, just trying to, breathe 6 times a minute using this method to, keep everything calm in that more static but difficult thing that I'm training. Right. But I'll also use this out walking the dog. I always ask my wife a question so that she can start talking, because you can't nasal breathe when you're talking. So while she's talking, I'm doing this. All right. But yeah, this is a kind of a cool one. There's many of these out there, right? There's like a 4-8-9 is a 4 in, 8 hold, 9 exhale is been one that's been shown to help people and things like that. There's a lot out there, right? And that was one of the things with the course, is like, well, there's a lot out there, but can we put it all in one place, so you don't have to do hours of YouTube searching? And can we explain why it's beneficial and what are some things to do? Because that's what I was wondering when I'm taking courses. I like to learn a little bit, then I'm like, okay, so now what do I do? What is the thing? What is the drill? What is the exercise, right? That I want to know what to do, not just the theoretical. The theoretical is good and it's important and interesting, but you need techniques too, Any questions on this stuff that we were talking about? Okay. I was pretty happy with this slide, by the way. I thought that was a cool build. And okay, so breathing habits. So PB3, what I really want to get into is like, okay, how do you use this in daily life, in sports, in exercise, et cetera? So the 2 breathing habits are proper breathing during exercise and then recovery breathing. The big thing with proper breathing during exercise is basically synchronizing your breathing with your movement, right? Which becomes more instinctual, right? Once you kind of do it and train it, just like everything else, right? It's consciously make this a habit initially. This is the synchronizing your breathing with the moment, with your movement, is super important with endurance sports or aerobic activity, right? That is by its nature cyclic, running, rowing, cycling, that kind of thing, right? And like in the course, it said, the best way to start is just go, okay, I'm with every step, right? In 4 steps, I'm going to go right, in, out, step, 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 right? And then start to play with it. Maybe you're actually better in, out, out, in, out, right? Or some other combination, right? It's probably not going to be vastly different than that, because you're not going to breathe in for 8 steps while you're running, right? As an example. But synchronizing your breathing with your movement in those kind of aerobic activities, right? It is important. If you don't think about it, and I've seen this with athletes who, or even good runners, for instance, right? And I'm like, hey, what's your breathing cycle while you're running? They're like, I don't know, I just breathe. So then they learn this, and they become even a little bit better. They're already really good, and then they become a little bit better because now they're synchronizing their breathing with their movement. With we already talked about the nasal breathing last time and ways to use that with aerobic type activity. So I won't repeat any of that unless you guys have questions about it. If you're doing like rowing or the like the ski ergs, right? That kind of anything that's aerobic that does have a lot of trunk flexion, right? Then you want to make sure that you are breathing in accordance with your trunk's movement. So what offers good breathing? So you look at the picture, the gal is forward, she's in trunk flexion. It's hard to use your diaphragm when you are flexed over like that, right? So you should be exhaling when the trunk is in flexion, inhaling when you go in extension, like you're doing the pull here, like this guy's doing, right? Or the guy is doing, right? As he's in that pull phase of the rowing. CrossFitters love this, right? Because a lot of things that they're right that love learning this on how, because they're always out of breath, right? That's the nature of that exercise modality. But this really helps. And then that exhaling during flexion, inhaling during extension flows over into your anaerobic work or like weight training, right? Now, if you're doing something super heavy, right? If you're doing, 1 to 5 reps of deadlift, then you should be using the breathing for bracing, right? You're taking a big inhale in, you're holding it during the descent phase of a squat or a deadlift, right? And then you're exhaling through the exertion or at the top. There is, so that's abdominal bracing, right? Good for brace your spine. I will tell you there is some very new research, as in since we put this course out, that's starting to come out, that we may tweak that 1 or 2 sentences that I said in this course. It's not bad to do what I just explained for max efforts, but we're starting to see some research now that it's better not to just hold the breath like you see powerlifters do, right? They take a big breath in, they get that abdominal bracing, and then they go entirely through their movement before they breathe again. We're starting to see it's a little bit better. You take that big breath, you're holding it, you go down, and as you're going up through the deadlift, through the squat, right, you're actually exhaling like a forced exhale, right? Not just, but like you're almost like pursed lipped exhale, right? Like doing that. When you get outside of those max efforts, though, right? So whether you're doing, lifting where it's, somewhere in the 6 to 20 rep range, or you're doing, something else where there's interval training, that kind of thing, you want to be thinking about this exhale during flexion, inhale during extension. I mean, we gave a couple examples in the course, right? If I'm doing higher rep squats, I really want to be exhaling while I'm going down and inhaling while I'm going up. I don't want to be doing a breath hold when I'm not doing max hold or max efforts, right? If I'm sub-maximal efforts, whether it's very high repetition or moderate range repetition, you want to be breathing with a movement, right? So you want to be inhaling when that spine is going into extension, and you can actually get some diaphragmatic movement, and not trying to inhale when that trunk is flexing. Or even if the trunk's not, your trunk shouldn't be flexing when you're, say, squatting or deadlifting, but you are hinging at the hip, right? So as I'm hinging at the hip, that's going to be harder to get that diaphragmatic inhale, right? So you want to be exhaling there. Does that make sense to you guys? Oh, Unmute.
My bad. Quick question. For me, I'm glad you addressed this because like even when I cycle and obviously an aerobic commitment, right? Like it's almost entirely aerobic, probably zone 2 type training most of the time. I can even feel my breathing with my cadence. It feels right. I know what I'm capable of. When I go beyond that, then I'm stressing a little bit and I know I'm entering, a different zone of training. My question is, and you addressed this with like patterns like this that are anaerobic with weightlifting, but what about a sport like wrestling or other sports that are lean anaerobic, but they're also, you don't have patterns that you can really follow. You kind of breathe when you can. How do you address that?
Yeah, and that's a great question, right? Because you don't want to be thinking about inhaling or exhaling like as you're going into the fireman's, right, or something like that, right? So sports that are power and performance sports, whether it's wrestling, volleyball, football, things like that, then the goal with the breathing is that you've trained it during your training, your practice, so that it happens during your sport, right? While you are doing your activity, because you're not going to be able to think about, we have the opportunity, we have the flexibility in, if we're cycling, if we're running, if we're rowing and things like that, to kind of think about it, because it is just cyclic, right? We're going through the same thing over and over. We don't have that opportunity and to do that during plays or during the activity that's going on in more power and performance sports. So you're training of the breathing to create these habits, whether you're training in the weight room with the things we just talked about, right? Or you're doing your specific breathing training, then carries over to like when you're in the middle of a scramble on the wrestling mat, or when you're on the football field and you're sprinting to get to that receiver to try and tackle them, right? Or in volleyball, when you're jumping, think about when you're gonna spike the ball and you're going up into extension, and then as you're coming through and that trunk is flexing, right? There are some kind of natural human breathing patterns that happen with things like that. If you've ever taken martial arts, you kia when you're striking, right? So that you have so you can't get the breath knocked out of you because you're exhaling as you're striking. So a lot of that stuff was going to happen naturally, and it'll happen even more naturally if you've done the breathing training, right? And then for power and performance sports, perfect segue into the recovery breathing. Actually, like, when are you consciously using breathing? It's in between plays, in between periods on the wrestling mat, right? In between points on the court, right? Volleyball court, basketball court, tennis court, right? That's when you're using this recovery breathing, where you're kind of using that 2-4, that pursed lip breathing, to try to, as quickly as you can, recover your breathing. So this is how I use this in exercise to make this more habitual, so that when I'm doing a sport, I'm naturally going into the recovery breathing. You can still be thinking about it, can still be conscious, right? But your goal is, so like if I'm doing more interval type training, say I'm doing like a kettlebell workout or something like that, right? Or Coach Haggerty might know, Bulgarian bag workout, right? You see him on the wall, the Bulgarian bags, right? Swinging. So say you're doing a training like that. In between the intervals and things, I'm trying to do this recovery breathing where even though my breathing rate's high, my heart rate's high, my breathing rate's high, right? I'm taking the 2 in, doing the 4 out. I am trying to recover my breathing rate to normal in 2 breaths. That's my goal, right? Which feels really, really, really weird once you're able to do it, because your heart's still going like this, right? Because it's a delayed effect on the heart rate, because the heart's still trying to get oxygenated blood to all these areas that need it. So it's still going, but all of a sudden you control your breathing and your breathing rate. Man, does that bring the stress or threat levels down, right? And then your heart rate will more quickly than someone who's not doing this will more quickly come down as well, right? So, thinking about that, thinking about, man, I've just done this burst of something, right? Maybe I'm on an Airdyne bike and I'm doing intervals, or maybe I'm doing any kind of interval training. Maybe I'm doing sprints on the bike, right? Or you're you got your youth football team and they're doing sprints on the field, right? They should be trying to recover their breathing super quickly, right? And then once you get good at it, then even in a sport like wrestling, right? Because you got this, couple minute period of activity, but there are moments when you break away, right? Can you bring your breathing rate down in a couple breaths? And when you can do that, man, that's empowering. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, it's like so the goal for more of an anaerobic, like untimed breathing pattern, you condition it it's conditioned in practice, but 2, it's a true focus. Like when you have the opportunity to breathe, you take advantage of it. Like you have to breathe. You go after that moment in training.
Jordan
Yeah.
Burroughs does this as a reset, and he's probably one of the best in the world at it.
His sock pull.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with his socks.
Yeah,
Take the
for sure.
pause. He pulls his socks. He lets his arousal get to where it needs to be. He improves his focus, takes a couple of breaths, changes his physiology, and then he goes out and executes his double leg, wraps up the match. I don't know if there's anybody better in wrestling that does it than Burroughs on the reset. But you give up a takedown, the momentum is in a negative place. You're under threat. How do you change that in the moment? That's your reset. I get my reset. I feel better. I re-engage parasympathetic. Now I can go back out and compete better. But you got to give yourself and build that time in. That's strategy for the coach to teach your athlete in that moment. Football teams call a timeout after the opposing team scores a touchdown because they need to regroup. But again, what we do is, unfortunately, sometimes we create more threat by screaming and yelling at our kids to try to motivate them instead of giving them a safe place to say, hey, we're good. We know what we're doing. We're going to go on the field. We're going to execute. I got you guys. Right. So that's a supportive as opposed to a threatening reset. I know we're getting close to the hour too, but I love this stuff. So I keep it in.
All right. Any other questions on the last 2 breathing habits? All right. Awesome. So the couple books we recommended there, Patrick McCowan, Irish guy who is studied this method called the Buteyko method. Dr. Buteyko was a Ukrainian doctor under the Soviet Union back in the day, and who would use breathing, right, and very low, kind of shallow breathing, like he would talk about sipping the air through your nose, where you're just barely breathing, right? To retrain people's breathing cycle and balance that carbon dioxide and oxygen ratios. In fact, the controlled pause in the assessments, where you take you inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, hold, right? And time after a normal exhale, that comes from the Buteyko method, actually. And then this guy studied a lot of, so really good book, and a lot of cool stuff. There's a lot. It's very much the controlled breathing aspect, and but an interesting book. Was one to give you guys things you could check out. And then the language of coaching is not breathing specific at all, but just a great book on how do you speak coaching, right? And you know, Mike Clayton could talk even more about that.
Yeah, the coaching cues, how do we cue athletes in the moment to give them the ability to both and this I used to separate mind and body, and working with Pat, it's much less about separating them. It's understanding they both work as a system all of the time. So it's influencing this one, influencing that one to create the best. And Winkleman does an amazing job in this book with teaching you coaching cues. Training centers had him on a lot of calls, and great book.
All right, the program, as you guys saw in there, right? In this one, we've got 3 programs. Just depends on for a 14-day breathing habit builder, right? And it really just depends on what your time availability, right? So in program 1, you're trying knocking out all these breathing drills we've done through 1, 2, and 3. 2, kind of splitting it half and half, and then 3, splitting it down, even more. Would I want you to do that program 1 where you're doing all of them? Yeah, of course, right? But the reality is, I want you just doing something, right? It takes steps, right? And we build habits through doing things, right? And actually doing and putting effort towards them. We build bad habits in the same way, the things we do, right? If we're doom scrolling too much on the phone, things like that, those become habits too, right? So a habit doesn't mean good, it just means something we do a lot. That's why I love this quote from Dr. Cobb. This is more of a paraphrase. One of the courses, it was actually a course called the Z Health course called Sustenance and Spirit. So the sustenance part was kind of like the neurology of nutrition and things like that, right? The spirit part was about topics like motivation and things like that. I went into that course, that 4-day long course, thinking, oh man, I'm going to find out all this great nutrition stuff. That was like 20% of the course, maybe 25% of the course. The vast majority of the time we were talking about how do you change people, right? Or get them to change. That's really what the majority of the course is, because nutrition, I mean, you talk about nutrition, you might as well be talking religion or politics with people, right? Everyone's got different opinions on different things and stuff. Nutrition is a very young science. There's things we definitely know, but nutrition is also very individual, and you have to learn how to become your own food scientist. But the spirit part of that course, which was the about motivation and stuff, and I just thought this was cool when you talked about, because I always thought, especially all the stuff I did, it was about, I was successful because I was disciplined. And he's like, it's not, there really is no such thing as discipline. It's about having good habits, right? You don't have discipline to brush your teeth every night. You've made that a habit, right? So what do you want to get better at? Right? What do you think you want to have the discipline to do? Ask your question, what am I doing to make this a habit? Right? And it's the small thing. So that's why you go back to those programs. If you can only do, program 3, where it's just a handful of exercises each day for 14 days, awesome, do that, right? Because it's about building the habit, and we do that in small steps. We all know people who's like, wanting to lose 100 pounds, and then they're like, they want to do it all right now. And, it never works. And even people who are successful at that, most usually bounce back, gain it all back, things like that, right? Because they didn't build the habits in. And that's super important. All right. So throwing this up there, that's my email, pat@neurotrainingeducation.com. Right. And we'll, as we send out a roll-up email after this, I want you guys to have access to me if you have other questions, right? A couple things as we kind of roll out of this, as we kind of start to build this neurotraining community, right? Have you guys ever heard of the term plank owners or plank holders? right? So the first one in the military, that was, if a new kind of unit got started, and the first guys or gals who were part of that unit were plank holders, right? The first ones, and that's you guys for performance breathing, right? So one, we really appreciate that. Two, I still want to be able to answer your questions, right? As things come up and you train this more and you're doing it, send me an email and ask a question. I've got no issue with that. The another thought I had too is as we build more courses and stuff like that, you might be beneficial for us to use you guys as beta testers. As the courses come out, and if you guys are agreeable to that, we'd like to utilize you for that. And so we really, I know Mike's probably got, maybe Anthony too, has got some closing things, but one, we really appreciate you guys doing this. This very first time of going through this, as you can probably tell, I talk about this stuff all the time with people, right? In a one-on-one kind of environment, but our ability to affect larger groups of people is going to be in this kind of a manner. And that's what we want to do. Like Mike said, earlier about, man, I wish I'd had this when I was in high school. I wish I'd had this when I was in college, or even as a young man in the Army. Well, that would have been great. And so that's how we push this out, not just word of mouth, but through other organizations and things. And that's what we want to do is we want to grow it bigger, grow the community bigger, but get the information out. And our goal is to have simple programs that you can do. There's specific things, there's programs to them, and there's a methodology to it, right? And so hopefully it's been that for you guys.
Yeah, Pat, I can't thank you and Mike enough, and Julie, it was great to get to see you on the calls, experience this. And Anthony, thank you for what you do. But I've taken a lot of valuable information from this myself. Thank you.
Awesome.
And I'll echo the same sentiments, and just really excited about helping build the community, because there's, I know, Pat, you mentioned a couple times, like there's a lot of information out there. Well, I didn't get a lot of information until I stepped in this room. So I think you're immersed in it. I think there's a lot of people out there that don't know what they don't know, and they don't know they need this. So I think there's a lot of people who don't know there's a lot of information, or that this is even a solution for them. So I'm excited to just continue to move that mission forward.
Mike has to remind me of that all the time, because you're right. I am immersed in it. I'm doing it every day. I'm constantly looking what the new stuff, looking for the new things that are out there. Doing and paying for this kind of training myself for different levels of things. So yeah, you're right. I am immersed in it, and it makes me think.
And those algorithms, it's like they know you. So
right, yeah, they got me for sure.
But thank you so much for your knowledge, your specialty, and your willingness to pay that forward. Because I think, especially in the youth sport industry and coaching industry, it's massively needed. But we don't know we need it yet. So it'll take time, but I appreciate all you've done, all of you.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, we'll send out an after action report, and certainly because we're so close with you guys, we'll have an opportunity to jump on the phone and take your advice on ways we can improve. But thanks to Pat, thanks to Anthony for helping to organize these. Thanks to you guys for jumping in. And Anthony, any?
No, you guys nailed it. There will be a survey in the wrap-up email, so the video from this session, along with a quick exit survey. So certainly your input will be a big help.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
Great meeting you guys.